Welcome to Tech Houblon, the podcast that explores information technology and our passion for beer. I'm your host, Paul Saucier, and in this episode recorded at Ben's Bar, we dive into the exciting world of information technology. From the latest news and trends to expert opinions, we cover it all, not to mention our beer recommendations. Whether you're a fan of technology, good beer, or a curious listener, there's always something new to learn on Tech Houblon. Today, I have the immense pleasure to have Tracy Walker, who is the Senior Security Engineer for SUSE, as we cover a very, very important topic and one that I actually get asked about quite a bit, given my security background, and it's container security and beyond just vulnerability scanning, which is very important, as our chat prior to this made me realize. So let's get into it. As I mentioned, we have Tracy Walker, who is not only somebody that I respect tremendously in terms of security and containers and all that fun stuff, but I also like to call Tracy a friend, and partly because I believe he is a terrific human.
Oh.
And partly because you are a 6'8" mountain of a man, and I do not want to disappoint you in any way, shape, or form. So before we get into this topic, I really like people to get a quick sense. I know it's just a few minutes, and it's hard to really, give our life story in 2-3 minutes. But just so people can understand that you're an actual human behind all the brain power.
Actual human. Last time I checked, yes. I'm from Denver, Colorado. Have lived there since I was in my mid-20s. Went to school there, and have married, have a daughter who just started college at CU Denver in Denver, and and have been in IT for, since 93, so 30 years. Really makes me feel it. But most of that time spent in software development, operations, a lot of internal IT, and then in the last 10 or so years started working on the sales side and working with various products and startups and things like that. And so joined a company called NeuVector about 4 years ago. NeuVector is a container security platform, and that company was acquired by SUSE. And so I've been with SUSE for the last couple of years and have enjoyed it very, very much.
How was the transition between a pure startup, I would imagine, at NeuVector still, when they got acquired?
Yeah, it was obviously very exciting. SUSE had acquired Rancher, which is a container orchestrator, which is also kind of in our topic wheelhouse today. And so, we've followed that acquisition. And so very, very exciting, because now we're dealing, we always loved the folks from Rancher, and they were always very nice to us. We had already been doing some co-promotions between the products. And
prior to the acquisition?
Prior to the acquisition, yeah.
Gotcha.
Actually knew some of the folks over there. And so when they got acquired, we were like, oh, that's awesome. And then year and a half later, we got acquired as well. So it was very, very nice. Okay. Very, very nice, yeah. Obviously, changes happen when big companies acquire littler companies and all that, but SUSE has been fantastic for us.
Yeah. You mentioned your daughter going to university.
Yes.
That's probably a big event in your life. Or your family's life.
It's a big event for sure. Definitely for her. It's been a little quieter on our side.
I can imagine.
As big events go, but it's been it's another one of those transitions in life when now they're more independent and doing things on their own and responsible for their grades.
Right. So I have kids of my own as well, and it's one of those things where, as parents, that's part of the process, right? This is what we sign up for. It's like they grow up, they start their own lives, and it starts, I think, there at university when it's their life gets expanded,
right,
times 10 or 100,
right.
And it's always a funny feeling as a parent, because you're happy, but then there's also like a bitter side, because there's major changes happening in your life. But having a good partner that you have in your life as well probably helps, and that's what
Absolutely.
you look at in the next chapter, right?
Absolutely. And it's you want to believe you've done the best to prepare them and get them ready, and yet you're still just ready to grab the back of the bicycle seat and go, don't fall, don't fall. It's hard to let go like that.
Yeah, and they will fall.
Totally, I know,
Yeah.
I know.
That's the hard part.
Absolutely.
We the name of our podcast, which basically we mix beer and tech, and it's greatly in part because of our bar that we're in right now.
Absolutely.
That you just came into.
Amazing.
Well, thank you. And we just generally have a love of beer in this company, and it starts with our founder Benoit. So we always invite people to actually have a beer or a drink, depending on what they have. And I noticed yesterday at dinner you had a beautiful martini ordered, so I figured you'd have a cocktail to present to us today.
I do have a cocktail, and to harken back to my hometown. And I wasn't born and raised in Colorado. I was born and raised in Texas, near Amarillo, Texas. But I consider myself to be from Colorado now, and
right.
So my drink of choice today is a Colorado Bulldog.
Okay, So a little part of my background is also being a mixologist, and I have to say I do not know this cocktail.
I am not surprised.
Okay,
It may only be popular in Colorado. Basically, it is exactly the same as a White Russian, except you top it with about an ounce of Coke. Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper. I prefer Coke myself, but yeah, and that makes it a Colorado Bulldog. How it got the name, I did Google it. Yeah. Nobody knows.
It just happened.
Everybody said nobody knows how they came up with this name, so I wasn't able to find it via Google. But
And can you share the recipe? Is there like an actual recipe you follow?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an ounce of vodka, it's an ounce of Kahlua, an ounce of Coke, which you had last. Maybe 1.5 to 2 ounces of cream, depending on your taste.
Right.
So just make your favorite White Russian.
Right.
And then add an ounce of Coke on top of it.
You don't supplement. You just add.
Just add.
Got you.
Just add. It gives a little fizz.
Right.
If the cream, not to be gross, but if the cream curdles just a little bit, just stir it up. It tastes great.
Okay.
It'll be great.
It's worth the effort of.
It is. Yeah. It is. It's a kind of a coffee and Coke. It has a really cool taste to it.
It looks beautiful. I'll say that, and I will taste one after this podcast. For
Absolutely.
Sure. On my side, I have a beer from Gallicus Company or Brewery. They're based out of the Outaouais region, close to Gatineau, I believe. And the beer is called Aura, and it is a double NEIPA. I never remember if it's New England or Northeast. I believe it's New England IPA. I'll stick with that. Please correct me, audience, if you know the exact answer to that. This one is 3.9% alcohol for me, which is great in the middle of the afternoon like this.
Perfect.
I'm just going to open this now. So our topic today, we are talking about container security. And I consider you my expert. If I have any questions, I go to Tracy. But before we get into this, and again, this is a question that I get asked a lot, mostly, honestly, since the last 6 months. It's a really hot topic that keeps coming back. But before we get into that, I really want to sort of distinguish between what's containers versus Kubernetes.
Sure.
It sounds like a very simple ask, but there's quite a bit of confusion there from a lot of people, including myself at times.
Sure.
Can you sort of make it so that we understand the difference?
Absolutely. In fact, let's even kind of back up to, to simplify it even more, think of virtual machines, or even think of, servers or even laptops, right? So we had been talking a little bit before we started today that, you can break down any technology into compute, storage, and network, right? And so when we're talking about containers, the reason why there is such a thing called containers is the cloud, right? Before cloud, we had virtual machines, we had dedicated servers, running in data centers, stuff like that. But to do that in the cloud, to spin up a VM, takes some time to spin a virtual machine up, right? And it's just like, I'm sure a lot of people out there understand their laptop or just kind of a single unit of compute, if you want to think of it like that. A laptop has compute, storage, and network. So a container has the same thing. It has compute, it can have storage, it can have network, and it spins up very, very fast because it's what we call lightweight. And maybe it doesn't have all of the pieces that, say, if you're thinking of an operating system like Linux, Windows, whatever, it would be a very light version, right? It doesn't have everything in it. Maybe it doesn't have Notepad, just to keep it super simple. But so a container is basically the smallest unit that you can run a workload, or you may have 3 containers that are running a workload. Or maybe you have 30, or then maybe you have 300 as you continue to containerize things, right? So when you get to a lot of small things and more granular, then you need help kind of managing those, because I want to make sure they're running. And if one stops, I want it to automatically spin back up. And then maybe I'm hitting up against memory pressure, so I need to add memory. So the orchestrator helps me do that. It can help me automate all of that so that if I'm running 300 or even 3,000 containers, I can do so with a lot more automation. And so kind of that operational aspect, or orchestration, right? Spinning them up, spinning them down, scaling so that I have more containers running the workload, et cetera, monitoring that the health is good, helping with security. So the orchestrator is very much air traffic control for lots and lots of containers.
Right.
Could I do all of that without an orchestrator? Probably, but it would take a lot of work and,
Would you want to do this?
Exactly. You wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
I would want, do you want to use a toothbrush or you want to use a broom? So I'd rather have a big broom handle all of that. Absolutely.
And is there a management of shared resources too? For like if you're running 300 or 3,000 containers, not all of them are going to be using the resources at the same time. So does it also manage?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's even important to understand in a orchestration cluster, when we talk about a cluster, we are talking about, now we're getting into nodes. Well, what's a node? Well, you're back to your laptop or a server or this unit of compute. So I can have multiple virtual machines that are all part of the same cluster. We call it a cluster of machines. And yes, being able to scale the nodes up and down, also very important. So yes, that orchestrator is always taking care of basically everything that your containers are running in, on, and around, and even connecting clusters, even helping with segmentation between different kinds of workloads and allowing for extra security layers between those clusters.
Right. Okay. So it makes a very complex
environment. It can get
less complex.
A lot less complex of something that is already pretty complex. Absolutely.
Got you. Obviously, security plays a role into this, and especially when you're talking about, having containers all over the place. How are we looking at security when it comes to containers?
Yes. Well, in many ways, we look at it exactly the same. Like we take good security principles, right? We want to employ layers of security. We assume that no layer of security is perfect. That's why we have layers. Strategically, they can create a lot of security layers that are very effective, right? I even hate using words like, well, this is better than that. This is a better security than that. Well, they can be more effective, certainly, but every security layer should be good, right? It should be contributing to security. It shouldn't be slowing me down. It shouldn't be too restrictive and all those things, right? We've seen bad security that is too restrictive and that takes my app down. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to get rid of that layer. That layer is not contributing to the business using my app, Mm-hmm. So first part, we always kind of look at it the same way.
So the security principles don't change.
The security principles don't change. But when you add abstraction layers, now I've abstracted a virtual machine. Now I'm going to use containers, and I'm going to have more of them. They're smaller, they're faster to spin up and things like that. But every one of those creates an opportunity for a new threat vector. Maybe they all are going to have network connections. Well, if I now have 1,000 containers, I have more than 1,000 network connections. And so there's as we add these abstractions like containers or an orchestrator, you're adding additional threat vectors. So there's where we need to start looking at where can we add layers to add to our security as we create these. I think a common misconception is, well, if it's still all running on a virtual machine, I can use the exact same security that I would for a virtual machine. The problem with that thinking is that you've created additional places to get into that virtual machine. You've opened up new network connections that connect to a container or more containers running on that virtual machine. So now instead of that virtual machine maybe having 5 known network connections, it may have 50 or 500 or whoever knows.
Right.
And every one of those creates new ways of getting in, new things that you have to secure against.
Okay. So I hear personally about vulnerability scanning all the time. And it's obviously a very important step. When we're talking about containers, how do you look at scanning versus something else? Like how important is the scanning?
I think scanning is very important. I think most organizations are using scanning for CVEs because if there's a vulnerability, I should patch it, I should close that hole. So it's a very important layer, no question about it. It reduces your risk. I think that the popularity of scanning is just due to the fact that there's lots of scanning tools available. There's free tools that allow you to scan and look for those vulnerabilities. And it's easy to say, well, if I've got this vulnerability, I can patch it. Vulnerability gone, I've reduced my risk. So fairly easy to do and remediate.
And is that sort of a push by the manufacturers as well, like as their way to do security with this?
I think that I think a lot of vendors tend to promote the products that they have versus promoting security and what their products can do to contribute to that security.
Makes sense.
And because sometimes I never feel like one product ever fits the whole bill, right? I know we sometimes need, for pragmatic reasons, maybe we only select one particular vendor or product to try to cover as much possible for lots of very valid reasons. But especially when it comes to like the scanning, I think that I've seen a lot, especially organizations are in a variety of maturity levels when it comes to running containers and Kubernetes and in the cloud and the whole thing. And so I think sometimes earlier adopters primarily used the scanning because that was the only thing that people were really doing. And, it was new
what
tools.
They know.
Yeah, it's all they knew.
Yeah.
But I think that has also led to a point where, especially if they've had no issues for years just with doing the scanning, that there becomes this feeling of, well, I can't be hacked if I've got everything patched. And, we've remediated just about everything. We never get any new CVs. We're always on the latest version of our tools and everything. That's unfortunately, that is not the case. Not to, be a fearmonger, but you need additional layers of security, right? Mm-hmm. Scanning for vulnerabilities, for example, will not stop a 0 day. It's called a 0 day because there is no signature. There's nothing to match it against. It hasn't been seen before. So vulnerability remediation won't remediate a 0 day until that 0 day has hit something, been discovered, been published. Hey, now you got to go patch curl, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We had you mentioned runtime in our conversations before the podcast, which I really
Absolutely.
Appreciate. How does that differentiate from scanning, and how important that becomes for the different layers?
Absolutely. So runtime security, applying security layers to an actively running application generally gets back to, all right, so again, the runtime is storage, it's network, it's processes. So there's ways of applying security layers to your network, like firewalls and those kind of things. Same with processes, what processes are allowed, which are not. Sometimes you can handle some of that runtime security with just things like permissions and group permissions and ability to execute versus just read, write, or whatever. But then there's other ways of, like in a lot of security situations, especially a zero trust environment where, you're following the principles and concept of zero trust. I'm not talking about the marketing stuff out there where everybody tries to put zero trust stickers on everything. But the concept of zero trust, where you have a perimeter, you're constantly monitoring that perimeter, you have authenticated who or what is doing things in that perimeter and what they're allowed to do, and in the ability to enforce to make sure nothing else is allowed in that. And so those kind of principles being able to employ into like runtime for containers or Kubernetes really has only been around for just a while. And a lot of companies trying to do different approaches to the runtime. A lot of them are using like extended Berkeley packet filtering, eBPF, fantastic technology that allows you to see all the events happening at the kernel. But I think, sometimes that capability, when they, I've heard vendors say, well, this is the best source of truth because everything happens at the kernel. Not true and not true. It's a great source of truth. I don't like using best or worse. I like it's a very effective source of truth. Should not be considered your only source of truth. I like having multiple sources of truth that I can compare against each other. And from a zero trust or a runtime standpoint, using eBPF, the kernel doesn't see all the network traffic. It'll see layers, of the OSI stack, it'll see layers 1 through 4. So it sees routes. It's kind of like having Google Maps that only shows you the map, but doesn't show you cars or the traffic or slowdowns on the highway, right?
Right.
So the kernel, will give you that information, the map, but it won't give you what does the car look like, who's driving it, did it reach its destination, what's in the trunk.
Right, exactly. Like your top three layers.
The payload, yeah, absolutely. So that can be important too. So in the evolution of runtime security, yes, you want to have as much information about the runtime as possible, hopefully from multiple sources of truth, if you will, that you can compare against each other. Are they all consistent? If they're all sources of truth, they should have the same truth, right?
Yeah.
So it's always good to have additional sources of truth. I recall SolarWinds was the source of truth for what SolarWinds was reporting and was leaving out this little bit about all this extra stuff that it was sending out over the wire.
Right. Got you. We talk, obviously security, we talk about the levels, different approach to that. We come across encryption quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And although encryption is highly recommended,
absolutely,
it's not enough.
No, it is a security layer. And I think that's the key point. Great example and great question, because I've had discussions with other security experts, and I don't necessarily consider myself an expert, but I do. Well, thank you. But so I continue to always ask, but I've had discussions where they're like, well, we don't need to add that security layer because we've encrypted the data. So even if they steal it, they can't use it. Well, that never makes me feel uncomfortable. If somebody steals my data, I don't care if it's encrypted or not, I know there is also a way to decrypt it. And I just would never trust that tomorrow, a year from now, or something that is like, oh, they came up with this new way of carving out encrypted packets and now they can put them back together. And oh, guess what? Now that data they stole 2 years ago is now out there, right. So it's a layer, but it's also a layer of kind of last resort. You broke through all my other layers. You got into the bank. I just scribbled on all the money so you can't use it. Ha ha. No, they took your money. It was all right. Scribbled up. And now you feel a little bit vulnerable. And so that's, again, we need lots of layers that are effective, don't slow us down, don't hurt the business, but allow us to control what we want to control without negative consequences.
Excellent. There's so much I want to talk to you about. And I think we're going to have a couple more podcasts to do together, because it's such a fascinating side of technology and of Kubernetes, obviously, and containers. And but I do want to talk about like some of the newer technologies, machine learning and AI.
You bet.
And do we trust these?
I don't. But see, that's another good question. In security, I have a hard time trusting anything. And that shouldn't be a personality trait on my behalf. If you're in security, you really shouldn't trust anything, right? There's that, trust but verify. Sure, I'll believe you, but I'm going to go and check it anyway, right? Or my source of truth. All right, I'll believe it, but I want something else backing it up that kind of gives me an independent source saying, yeah, that is also true here too.
It's a reference, right?
Absolutely. So machine learning and AI can absolutely contribute, no question, and can save us a lot of time and automation and help us identify things that are anomalous. But would I completely trust them? No. I want to add them as contributing layers. I still want to be able to monitor in various ways. I still want to, I always suspect that I'm already hacked. I'm already compromised. And I'm always just on this constant path of trying to prove that I'm not. And if I'm constantly proving that there's no way, and we're watching the data, and I've got the proof that I'm not, which is tough to prove that you're not, but that's ultimately your goal. You're constantly thinking, how would I get into here? What would I have done? Would I have just, whether it's internal actors, whether it's somebody, in a hoodie in their basement in the middle of the night, whichever mental image you want to create, but you should be thinking like that and thinking of, I don't trust anything. I would love to use machine learning, understanding AI and machine learning, how these things have to be trained up and kind of taught what to see so that over time, they have, the sophistication to understand what's going on and then let you know when this doesn't look right and why is this network connection going to, somewhere where you had no intention of that network or data going to. Yes, that would be fantastic to use. But I've also used a little bit of Chat GPT and, it's always good with human supervision, looking over there going, does that look right to you? Yeah, I think that looks right.
Right. So paranoia is a good trait to have in this line of work, is what I'm getting.
Yeah, yes and no. Yes and no. This is why we drink.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Any emerging trends that we see in container security right now?
I mean, I know we don't. I don't want to come off as pitching my own product here.
We'll allow it for.
Well, thank you. There's because I had mentioned eBPF earlier, and I think eBPF has been a significant trend. You see eBPF used by a lot of vendors like Aqua and Sysdig and SNCC and again, fantastic technology, right? You can, when you're able to do syscall, visibility and see everything that's running at the kernel, yes, you can see just about everything. But the problem with seeing everything is you are seeing everything. It's granular. It's like trying to find that perfect grain of sand on a beach. You really are trying to find a needle in a haystack. So I think one of the emerging trends, at least from what I've seen with NeuVector, because NeuVector does have a different technology that is network-centric, not kernel-centric, a little bit like Istio, which does a service mesh, and Linkerd does a service mesh. So those are the other ways of doing security and microsegmentation. But even those technologies, network-centric as they are, their approach is to use like sidecars. Every container in my cluster will have a sidecar, and then I'm going to network between all of these sidecar containers, and that's how I'm going to control the network, right? Kind of independently of Kubernetes. NeuVector's network-centric approach is more ability to inspect the network traffic for what's in, like earlier when we were talking about the map. So NeuVector would inspect what the color of the car is, the layer 7 protocol, the payload, what's in the trunk of that car. Did the network packets reach their destination? Was that network connection made? So NeuVector can see all of that kind of stuff. So a great supplement to what you would maybe getting from an eBPF or the syscall filtering, right? So again, And I guess maybe this is a little bit of a departure from what you might get from a lot of vendors, but we look at these vendors as not so much competitors, but as rivals to make us better, right? Because ultimately we're trying to add security layers, and we would like them to add security layers so that everybody can run Kubernetes and containers and be secure. Because if it's secure, more people will come to it, more people will use it, and feel that they are secure and that they can handle, making sure those workloads work as expected. So
I love that. That's a powerful message, right? Like let's group together. And again, in talking to clients, we understand very much that there's the unknown, or the lack of knowledge sometimes is what's preventing organizations from moving forward with modernization projects.
I mean, if I wasn't confident in my security around, the newer technologies like Kubernetes or containers, I would have a hard time sleeping at night.
Right.
I mean, and I can totally understand and have seen many companies like, we're just not ready. We don't quite know what we don't know. You need to know what you know and what you don't know. Mm-hmm. So it's absolutely causing a little bit of a lag of companies adopting it or adopting it as fast as they want. Or if they had adopted it and maybe they didn't really understand how to add extra security layers in there, and then maybe something negative occurred from that, and now they don't want to move to Kubernetes quite so fast. So I think all of those things can be factors.
So this leads to my my last topic before our next podcast, and it has to do with exactly what you just described there, which is, have you come across, is there like a real life example where you came across an organization that were not necessarily refusing, but doubting, moving forward with Kubernetes or containers, and what strategy did they use to feel comfortable to move forward with it?
Yeah, I can think of at least one example where a company that was using some license products, and I will also add NewVector that I was talking about earlier, and now is 100% open source. So it's something anyone can download, use for free. Yes, SUSE will sell you support if you need support and help, but it is an open source tool. Anybody can use it. You don't have to have a salesperson. You don't even have to talk to us. Just go.
And it's the same product that
it's exactly the same product, exactly, which I also love. I love the fact that SUSE open sourced NewVector when they acquired it. But strategies that I have seen, I mean, it's usually the strategy is they will, a company will look at all the different products and talk to all the different vendors and, get the PowerPoint presentations out and all of that kind of thing. What I've seen that has caused a company to kind of change direction on that, I know that there was a company that installed NewVector, and NewVector adds a lot of security layers. One of those security layers is it can do network threat detection. So they were immediately detecting a SQL injection attack. And their first thought was, well, this NewVector product isn't very good. Saying we're getting attacked right now, and we're not getting, they had a couple of other products that they were using. But NewVector has this capability of also doing a packet capture of that traffic. So they looked to see, well, why would this be telling us this? Well, when they looked at the packet capture, they could see, in Wireshark that this actually looks like a SQL attack, or, someone's trying to inject SQL commands into this web page. So then they went to the things that they were using for security and started asking, well, is it seeing this? Is anything else seeing that we're getting hit with this? Yes, they had other security layers that were preventing it from working, but they weren't getting any alerts on that. And so the strategy, I don't know if it was a strategy as much as it was a realization that they did not have enough visibility over everything. They didn't have a way to prove that this wasn't happening. And so it was an opportunity for them to say, okay, we've got an open source tool here. We're already using it in the same environment where we're using these other tools. We're going to keep using it because now we're seeing something we didn't see before. And now we have a tool that does packet capture. And now we have a tool that we can even control automatically how we do allow network connections and processes and things like that. And so then they could apply, some more zero trust principles. So in that case, I think the strategy was they were trying new things, seeing what they saw, kind of tripped over accidentally that they could see these network attacks and just added it to the security layers. And oftentimes companies approach it like, well, we have to use this or we have to use that. We're not going to pay for two. Totally understand that and understand how budgets work in IT and all that. But my advice is find the security layers that are effective, that give you the most data of, that you can prove that you're not under attack or that you haven't been exploited or whatever, and keep doing that. I mean, you're never in a place where you sit back in your chair in your office and going, we're secure.
Never going to happen.
You shouldn't. If anybody ever says, hey, that was secure. No, you secured it. Yes. Will I call it secure? No. Tightly locked down? Sure. But it's not impossible. It's always possible. No security layer is perfect.
I'm loving this conversation so much. And we will for sure have more podcasts coming up. That's our time for today. I'm going to leave you one last word. If there's anything you would like to add or...
No, this has been great. A fantastic discussion. Appreciate the time very much.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy. And I am looking forward to drinking what you're drinking right now, if you want to make me one.
I'm happy to.
Awesome. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, Paul.